Jack Harper had fought wars across continents, commanded thousands of troops, and faced dangers most people couldn't even imagine. But now, after decades of service as a 4-star general, he was ready for something different. He wanted peace, quiet, a place where the loudest noise was the wind rustling through the trees. So when Jack bought the sprawling ranch nestled just outside a sleepy town, he thought he had finally found it. The sun-drenched fields stretched for miles, dotted with grazing horses and old oak trees. It was the perfect escape from the chaos of the world he had left behind. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors waved politely. The community was governed by an HOA, the kind that promised to keep the neighborhood safe and beautiful. Jack thought it was just a small price to pay for the security and order they offered. But from the moment he settled in, Jack felt an uneasy tension simmering beneath the surface. The HOA board members greeted him with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Their questions felt less like welcoming conversations and more like careful probes, as if they were sizing him up or sizing him out. One afternoon, Jack received an official-looking letter from the HOA. The tone was polite but firm, reminding him of the community's strict rules about fencing, landscaping, and even paint colors. Jack raised an eyebrow. He was used to orders and protocols, but something about this felt different, almost petty. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting, curious to meet the people who governed his new home. The community center was packed with homeowners, but the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. The HOA board members sat at the front, exchanging knowing glances. Jack could feel the weight of their judgment. When it was his turn to speak, Jack introduced himself, explaining his background and his hopes for a peaceful life. But instead of welcoming words, he was met with thinly veiled skepticism. One board member even joked, "We'll see if you fit in around here, General." Jack's smile didn't waver, but inside, a cold warning stirred. This wasn't just about rules and regulations. This was a power game, and Jack was about to find out just how ruthless the HOA could be. Days passed, and strange things began to happen around the ranch. A neighbor mentioned seeing men with bulldozers near the drainage ditch behind Jack's property. But when Jack went to investigate, the equipment was gone, and the area looked untouched. Then came the heavy rains. What should have been a manageable storm turned into a nightmare. Water pooled and spread across Jack's fields, seeping into the barn and threatening his prized horses. The drainage channels that once guided rainwater safely away were clogged and diverted, as if someone had deliberately sabotaged them. Jack's heart pounded as he watched the water rise. He knew this wasn't an accident. The HOA had the means and the motive to make his life miserable. But why? Late at night, Jack caught glimpses of the HOA board members meeting in secret, their laughter drifting through the thin walls of the community center. They mocked him, calling him stubborn and out of place. But Jack was no ordinary homeowner. As he stood ankle-deep in muddy water on his flooded ranch, the quiet man with the calm exterior was already planning his next move. The general wasn't about to retreat quietly. Something told Jack this fight would be unlike any battle he'd faced before. But he was ready. The calm ranch hid a brewing storm, and Jack Harper was the eye of it. The morning after the storm, Jack Harper woke to the sound of water lapping against the barn doors. His heart sank. The ranch he had dreamed of protecting was under siege, not by nature, but by something far more insidious. He stepped outside, boots sinking into mud that stretched across his fields like a dark, creeping sea. The drainage ditches that once carried rainwater safely away were filled with dirt and debris. Worse, one section had been deliberately blocked with heavy machinery tracks leading away, as if someone had bulldozed it shut. Jack's sharp eyes caught tire marks leading toward the HOA's maintenance shed. The pieces fit together in a sinister puzzle. This flood was no accident. Someone had engineered it. Determined to get answers, Jack drove to the HOA office. Inside, the board members greeted him with forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The room was filled with an unsettling mix of arrogance and amusement, like they were watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, with Jack as the star. "General Harper," the HOA president said with a smirk, We all know how storms can cause damage. Sometimes Mother Nature has a mind of her own. His tone was dismissive, but the flicker of smugness betrayed him. Jack's gaze hardened. This wasn't Mother Nature. Someone blocked the drainage. I want to know who and why. Laughter bubbled from a few board members, but the president waved it off. We're here to enforce community standards, General. We have your best interests at heart. Jack knew better. Behind those polished facades were bullies, and his presence had threatened their control. Over the next few days, Jack's efforts to repair the damage were met with sabotage. Supplies ordered for drainage repair went missing. Contractors who showed interest received anonymous warnings to stay away. But Jack wasn't new to battles like this. He reached out to old military contacts, engineers, and legal experts, quietly assembling a team to counter the HOA's tactics. Late one evening, as Jack examined the flooded land by moonlight, a shadow moved near the drainage ditch. He tensed, hand hovering near his phone. From the darkness, a faint chuckle echoed. "Thought you'd like a little welcome gift, General," a voice sneered. Jack stepped forward, voice low but steady. "This ends now." The figure slipped away, but the message was clear. The HOA wasn't just playing dirty, they were waging a psychological war. Back inside his home, Jack reviewed the HOA bylaws and legal documents. The more he dug, the more corruption he uncovered. Unauthorized construction projects, misuse of funds, intimidation tactics. It wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Word began to spread among neighbors. Some whispered sympathy, others avoided Jack like a plague, afraid of the HOA's reach. But Jack's silence and resolve only deepened the mystery. Who was he really? What made him so dangerous? And the HOA's laughter, once a source of scorn, would soon turn to fear, because they didn't know everything about the man they targeted. Jack Harper was a 4-star general, and generals don't give up. The community center buzzed with murmurs and sideways glances as Jack Harper walked in for the latest HOA board meeting. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor. Every eye in the room seemed to weigh him, the new ranch owner, the outsider. Jack knew why they hated him. He wasn't like the other homeowners, the ones who bent quietly to the HOA's every whim. He was calm, collected, but unyielding. A man who had commanded armies and wasn't about to back down over a little flood. As the meeting began, the HOA president, a smug man named Craig, called Jack's name with a mocking grin. "General Harper, since you're so concerned about the recent flooding incident, why don't you enlighten us with your grievances?" Jack's eyes didn't flicker. "It's not just flooding. Someone on this board sabotaged my property. The drainage was blocked deliberately. I want accountability." A ripple of laughter ran through the room. Craig leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "You're new here, General. We run this community. Maybe it's time you learned how things work." Another board member, a woman with cold eyes named Marla, chimed in. "We have rules. And if you don't follow them, consequences happen. Maybe this flood was nature's way of telling you to play by our rules." Jack felt the heat rise, but his voice remained steady, laced with quiet steel. "I served this country for over 30 years. I don't take kindly to threats or sabotage." Craig's grin widened, and he turned to the gathered homeowners. "You see? The general thinks he's above us, but here, we're all equal, even if some think they're generals." Murmurs of agreement floated through the crowd. Some homeowners glanced nervously at Jack, others avoided his gaze. Jack's jaw tightened. He realized this wasn't just about the flood anymore. It was a battle for respect, control, and power. But beneath his calm, a plan was forming. The arrogance of the HOA board gave him an opening. They underestimated him. Badly. Before leaving the meeting, Jack locked eyes with Craig. "You'll regret underestimating me." Outside, the air felt heavier. The HOA's contempt was clear, but so was Jack's unshakable resolve. As Jack returned to his ranch, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The HOA had made a critical mistake, waking a general who never backs down. At the ranch, Jack inspected the flood damage again. The muddy water was receding slowly, but the scars ran deeper. This was personal now. Later that night, Jack called an old friend from the military, someone who understood battles fought off the battlefield. "They think I'm just a homeowner. They don't know who I am," Jack said quietly. His friend chuckled. "They're about to find out. Time to show them how a general fights a war." The seeds of the counterattack were planted. Jack wasn't just going to repair the damage. He was going to dismantle the corrupt HOA piece by piece. Meanwhile, the HOA board held a private meeting, their laughter echoing through the halls as they celebrated what they thought was a victory. But little did they know, the real battle was just beginning, and this general was ready to lead the charge. The sun was setting over the ranch, casting long shadows across the muddy fields that still bore the scars of the flood. Jack Harper sat alone in his study, the room quiet except for the soft rustling of papers and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Behind his calm exterior, memories flickered, vivid flashes from a life that most around him couldn't imagine, a life where decisions meant the difference between survival and defeat, a life defined by discipline, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. He thought back to the early days of his military career, a young officer fresh out of the academy, the first battle he commanded, a harrowing night raid where every move had to be perfect. Lives depended on his leadership, and failure was not an option. He remembered the weight of responsibility pressing down like a storm cloud. Then came the years of rising through the ranks, each promotion harder fought than the last. His reputation grew, a commander respected by allies, feared by enemies. A man who could see the battlefield like a chessboard, anticipating moves before they happened. But it wasn't just his tactical mind that set Jack apart, it was his integrity. Time and again, he challenged corruption within the ranks, exposed cover-ups, and fought for the rights of those under his command. He didn't just lead troops, he inspired them. The memories were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Mary, his longtime friend and trusted confidant, who had helped him settle into the ranch. She placed a steaming cup of coffee on the desk and looked at him with concern. "Jack, you're carrying a heavy burden. This HOA fight, it's not just about land or property, is it?" Jack shook his head slowly. "No, Mary. This is a test. They think they can intimidate me with tricks and threats, but they don't understand who they're dealing with." Mary sat down, eyes sharp. "Tell me again what you did in the service. What made you such a force?" Jack smiled faintly and began to recount. "I was the youngest general to lead a division in hostile territory. We faced impossible odds, harsh terrain, hostile forces, even betrayals from within. Every mission was a lesson in patience, strategy, and resilience." He paused, then continued. "I learned to read people, not just their words, but their intentions. That's why this HOA's bullying won't work. Their arrogance blinds them. They think rules and power are all they need." Mary nodded thoughtfully. "So you're going to fight fire with fire?" Jack's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "Not just fire, strategy. Every move they make, I'll counter. I'll expose their corruption, rally the community, and make sure they pay for what they did." Outside, the ranch lay in shadow, but inside Jack's home, a different kind of battle was brewing. One fought with intelligence, patience, and the unbreakable will of a man who had faced far worse than a petty HOA. As the night deepened, Jack pulled out old maps, legal documents, and notes. He began plotting his course of action, just as he had done countless times on the battlefield. This was no longer a peaceful retirement. It was a new mission, and Jack Harper was ready to lead. The storm outside had passed, but the real storm was only beginning. Days slipped by as Jack Harper moved quietly but deliberately. The flooded fields began to drain slowly, but the fight was far from over. He wasn't just repairing land. He was preparing for a battle that required far more than brute force. Jack reached out to old friends, engineers, and legal experts he had met throughout his military career. These weren't just any contacts. These were trusted professionals who understood the value of precision and timing. They agreed to help, intrigued by the challenge, and loyal to the man they respected. Secretly, Jack began documenting everything. He installed discrete cameras around his property, capturing suspicious activity near the drainage ditches and HOA offices. Every document, every conversation that hinted at wrongdoing was recorded meticulously. He knew that evidence was his greatest weapon. Meanwhile, the HOA board remained oblivious to the quiet storm gathering against them. They continued their petty harassment, issuing fines for minor infractions, and pressuring neighbors to turn against Jack. Yet, the general stayed calm, watching and waiting. One afternoon, Jack met with the engineers on his ranch. They examined the drainage system, pointing out flaws and vulnerabilities that the HOA had exploited. The repairs they proposed were more than fixes. They were improvements designed to prevent future sabotage. As the team worked, Jack reflected on the lessons from his military days. Success wasn't about rushing in blindly. It was about patience, strategy, and controlling the battlefield, or in this case, his home. Late that night, Jack reviewed the HOA's financial records, which had been leaked anonymously to him. The numbers revealed a pattern of misuse and secret deals that benefited a few board members at the community's expense. His suspicions had been right all along. But Jack didn't just want to fight. He wanted to win decisively. He drafted a plan to present his evidence to the media, legal authorities, and the neighborhood. The goal was to expose the corruption and force the HOA to answer for its actions. As he sat in his study, his phone buzzed. A neighbor, one of the few brave enough to speak out, had reached out with a warning. The HOA was planning another move, something big. Jack's eyes narrowed. The HOA wasn't just sitting idle, they were escalating. He knew this calm before the counterattack was fragile. Every second counted. In the days that followed, Jack intensified his preparations. His allies coordinated with lawyers to draft formal complaints. Engineers worked around the clock to repair and improve the ranch's drainage. The tension was palpable, but Jack's determination never wavered. He was no longer just a victim. He was a general preparing to lead a final, decisive battle. And when the HOA made their next move, Jack would be ready. Jack Harper barely slept that night. The warning from his neighbor weighed heavily on his mind. The HOA was planning something, and he needed to be ready. As dawn broke over the ranch, Jack's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from the local sheriff's office. "General Harper, we've had a complaint filed against you by the HOA. They're alleging unauthorized construction on your property and violation of community regulations." Jack's jaw clenched. This was the HOA's move, a legal ambush designed to intimidate him, tie him up in red tape, and drain his resources. But Jack was no stranger to facing accusations. In the military, he had weathered false claims and hostile investigations. He knew the value of patience and preparation. He gathered the legal team he had assembled and reviewed every document, every permit he had for his ranch. The accusations were baseless, but Jack understood the game. The HOA wanted to wear him down. That afternoon, Jack drove to the sheriff's office, calm but resolute. "I'm here to cooperate fully, but I want the investigation to be fair and transparent." The deputy nodded, clearly aware of the tension behind the case. Back home, Jack's security cameras caught more troubling footage. HOA board members sneaking around his property late at night, fiddling with equipment, leaving threatening notes pinned to his gate. The messages were chilling. "Leave now, or worse will come." Jack's military training kicked in. He documented everything, filing police reports and informing his allies. But the harassment didn't stop. One morning, Jack found several horses in the stable agitated, their water troughs empty and sabotaged. The flood wasn't just an attack on his land anymore. It was a personal assault. Despite the escalating threats, Jack's resolve only hardened. He arranged a town hall meeting, inviting the entire community. The agenda was clear: transparency and truth. When the night of the meeting arrived, the community center was packed. Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Jack stood at the podium, calm and commanding. "I'm here to tell you the truth about what's really happening in this community, about corruption, sabotage, and intimidation." He presented his evidence, Videos, documents, eyewitness accounts. The room fell silent, eyes wide with shock. Some neighbors whispered apologies, others shifted uncomfortably. The HOA board tried to interrupt, but Jack held his ground. This isn't about me. It's about fairness and respect for all homeowners. By the end of the meeting, the tide was turning. The community's support began to shift. But Jack knew this was far from over. The HOA's retaliation had only fueled the fire. And the general was ready to take the fight to the next level. The days after the town hall meeting were a whirlwind. Jack Harper's revelations sent shockwaves through the community. Supporters rallied around him, emboldened by the truth, while the HOA board members found themselves isolated, their carefully constructed power crumbling. But they were not done yet. Late one evening, Jack received a call from his lawyer, urgent and grim. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against him, alleging damages and seeking to freeze his assets. It was a final attempt to crush him financially and break his spirit. Jack's expression hardened. He had faced worse odds, entire battalions arrayed against him. Now, it was a war fought in courtrooms and community meetings, but the stakes were just as high. That night, he gathered his allies, legal experts, engineers, neighbors, in the barn. The group was small but determined, united by a cause bigger than any of them. "We're up against more than just a corrupt board," Jack said quietly, his voice steady but fierce. "They want to make an example of me, but we'll show them what it means to stand up for justice." Plans were laid out to counter the legal assault, expose further evidence of wrongdoing, and build a coalition strong enough to force the HOA to resign in disgrace. Meanwhile, Jack took steps to safeguard his property, installing security systems, hiring trusted contractors, and reinforcing the drainage system against future sabotage. But the personal toll was growing. Jack felt the weight of the fight, the sleepless nights, the stress, the isolation. His longtime friends urged him to back down, but he refused. One evening, as he stood overlooking the ranch, Mary approached quietly. "Jack, this isn't just about winning a battle. It's about protecting what you love. Don't lose yourself in the fight." Jack nodded, appreciating her words, but knowing the fight was far from over. Then, the unthinkable happened. A fire broke out in one of the barns, flames licking hungrily at the wooden beams, smoke choking the night sky. Jack rushed to the scene, heart pounding. Neighbors helped fight the blaze, but the damage was severe. It was arson. The message was clear. The HOA's desperation had reached a dangerous new level, but Jack refused to be cowed. As firefighters battled the flames, Jack vowed silently he would not rest until justice was served. The battle lines were drawn, and the final confrontation was imminent. Smoke still lingered in the cool morning air as Jack Harper surveyed the damage to his ranch. The burnt barn was a painful reminder of the lengths the HOA would go to stop him. But the fire hadn't broken his spirit. If anything, it had steeled his resolve. The investigation that followed uncovered shocking truths. Surveillance footage from nearby homes revealed a board member sneaking around the property just hours before the fire. Confronted with the evidence, the HOA's corrupt leadership began to crumble. But the real surprise came during a community meeting called to address the crisis. Jack stood before the crowd once again, not just as a victim, but as a leader. "This isn't just about me or my ranch," he said, voice ringing with conviction. "It's about all of us, about fairness, justice, and the right to live without fear." Just then, the local sheriff stepped forward, holding a file. "Thanks to General Harper's perseverance and the community's support, we have enough evidence to press charges against those responsible for the flood, the sabotage, and the arson." A collective gasp filled the room. The very people who had laughed at Jack's struggles were now facing serious legal consequences. The HOA board members tried to defend themselves, but their lies couldn't withstand the mounting proof. One by one, they resigned in disgrace, leaving a vacuum of power. But Jack wasn't finished. Drawing on his leadership skills, he helped organize a new homeowners association, one built on transparency, fairness, and respect. Neighbors who had once been silent now spoke out, united by a shared vision. Months later, the ranch flourished again. The drainage was rebuilt stronger than ever. The community was healing. Jack stood on his porch, watching children play in the fields and neighbors chatting on the street. A smile touched his lips. The fight had been hard, the scars deep, but justice had prevailed. And as word spread about the general who took on the HOA and won, Jack's story became a symbol, proof that no bully, no matter how powerful, can silence the truth. He had fought not just with rank or authority, but with courage, strategy, and heart. Because sometimes the greatest generals aren't those on distant battlefields, but those who stand tall to protect what they love.